Hello and welcome once again to the International Translation Day Conference brought to you by pros.com. In this presentation, I will be talking about multilingualism in Africa and its cultural impact on communication. Here's a quick introduction about myself. I am Oluwatobi Oladipo. I am the founder and CEO of iVoiceAfrica. I am an entrepreneur and a business mentor. I also run a business think tank in the United States. I consider myself to be very knowledgeable about the African languages and culture, and I'm also a linguophile. I speak 4 languages and a little understanding of a couple African languages. I started off my career as a voiceover artist, and right now I also do a lot of coaching to upcoming artists across the globe. In this presentation, here's a breakdown of how I'll be taking you through this journey. I'm going to start off by talking about language as a means of communication, then define what multilingualism is, then explain to you what we as Africans see as multilingualism, using Nigeria as a case study and deep diving into the Yoruba language. I'm going to further talk about the main point, which is the cultural impact of multilingualism on communication, and then share a couple of tips and words for translators and stakeholders in the localization industry. Then I'm going to talk about why multilingualism should be embraced, the obstacles facing multilingualism in Africa, and the possible solutions to these obstacles. If you're ready and excited about what is to come about this conversation, let me see you throw thumbs up in the chat box. All right, awesome stuff. Language as a means of communication. You see, language is the most basic way we connect and interact with one another, with our friends, with our family, at work, even at the market. And we do it via so many different means. It could be emails, it could be social media, it could be face-to-face, it could be over a phone or a video call. And so this means of communication has evolved over the years, thanks to technology. But you see, language plays a pivotal role in our lives. But because of how frequent and how often we get to use our language, we can easily forget just how important it is. There are times when we find ourselves in situations where no one understands us, and we don't even understand what people are saying. These are the moments when we realize just how important language is as a means of communication. Something happened to me a couple of years ago when I was transiting through the Dubai airport, and an aged woman walked up to me speaking Hindi. And that's because she had missed a flight and was trying to find a solution or a way out. And I remember asking her, in all the languages that I speak, do you speak this language, or how can I help you? And we could not really communicate. And it was at that point that I really understood the importance of language and the importance of communication. There is a distinction between having a natural conversation and being able to communicate. And these are the things that we're going to talk about today. Language also goes deeper than everyday conversations. It's more than just being able to interact with the next person and getting on the move. And this is because people define themselves by the language that they speak. So their language is inclusive of their different cultures, their identities, and their heritage. Now let's talk about the big word, multilingualism. Although the dictionary definition of multilingualism is the ability to use 3 or more languages fluently, but you see, the term multilingualism is still an actual very broad word. Researchers have gone all the way to classify this word called multilingualism into individual multilingualism and societal multilingualism, although they're very closely related. But individual multilingualism refers to how a person, as an individual, acquired the knowledge of a language and how they use it. But on the other hand, societal multilingualism refers to how languages are used in communities, in organizations, and groups. And this has to do with the context in mannerism and the likes. These studies on multilingualism are just to emphasize the depth of the meaning of the word multilingualism. And in today's presentation, we will be focusing on multilingualism in Africa. Are you ready for this? I need you to brace up because I'm going to be telling you a lot of things about multilingualism and languages in Africa. Did you know that in Africa, the continent of Africa, the beautiful continent of Africa, there is over 2,000 languages spoken? And there are several regional dialects that are over 7,000 spoken across the continent as well. So there is every possibility that if you speak a certain language, when you go to other regions across Africa, and even sometimes inside some countries in Africa, this dialect sounds different, or there are different dialects of this language, and you may even get lost in translation and lost in communication as well. I am going to give you examples of these languages as we go on with this presentation. Here's one thing I also need you to know, that most Africans are multilingual. And these are real life examples that you see on your screen. Somewhere in South Africa, there is a waiter in Cape Town who hardly went to a formal school, but has grown up being able to speak over 11 languages. The average Kenyan knows their tribal language or their tribal language and another tribal language if they grew up in a place inhabited by another tribe. English and Kiswahili is what you would most often hear a Kenyan speak, but you hear several other regional languages spoken by Kenyans, and some of them even speak French. Somewhere in South Africa, there are people that speak 9 out of 11 languages, and in Ghana, where they speak over 2, and in Ghana, you may find people that speak 2 international languages fluently and over 3 local languages within the country of Ghana. And now going back to when I mentioned you could be able to speak a language, but there are distinct dialects of these languages. And here are some examples: Mandinka, Yoruba, Fula, and Hausa. Although one language can be spoken in different places, the dialects and meanings differ. Mandinka is spoken in the Gambia, in Senegal, and Mali, but someone from the Gambia may not necessarily understand the Mandinka that is spoken in Senegal or in Mali. Likewise, Yoruba. Yoruba is spoken mostly in Nigeria. But for where I'm from, the state or the region that I'm from in Nigeria, the Yoruba that we speak is different from the Yoruba that is spoken a couple kilometers away from where I'm from. And that's very interesting. So you see, one thing I'm trying to highlight to you is that being able to speak a language in a region doesn't guarantee that you can communicate in other regions. Because at the end of the day, as translators, as content creators, as writers, what we are trying to do, the bottom line is to communicate. Now let's look at Nigeria as a case study. Nigeria is made up of several ethnic groups with several languages. And although the official language in Nigeria is English, it is less spoken in rural areas. And I must also let you know that Nigerians would rather not speak English in informal settings. And you'd most often hear Nigerians speak their local languages in informal settings, like in their homes, in their families, when they're speaking to friends and relatives. But when they go to the workplace or in a formal institution, we mostly would speak English. Other major languages spoken across Nigeria are Hausa, Igbo, Ibibio, Kanuri, and so on. Another thing I need you to know that is very interesting about Nigeria, and even a lot of African countries, is that body language communication is a big thing. I know when my mom is trying to say no or yes to me with her body language. As a matter of fact, I know when she's trying to tell me that I am in deep trouble just with her body language. And this is something that you see a lot of Africans do when they're trying to communicate. These languages are unique to different tribes and they all have their peculiarity. But for the sake of this presentation, I will be focusing on the Yoruba language. I have already given you an example of how my mom would communicate with me using body language. But here's something interesting about the Yoruba language as well. It is mostly spoken in Nigeria by over 47 million speakers, and it's a very tonal language. And one of the most intricate parts of the Yoruba language is how one word can have several meanings. And here are some examples of these words. If these words are not articulated properly in the right tone, it's easy to take these words out of context and derive completely different meanings than the original intended meaning. At the same time, speaking about the intricacy of Yoruba language, we express some phrases and sentences that mean something that is not exactly the literal translation. And so, being in the localization industry, I have seen some translators make errors with some of these phrases or some of these sentences. An example is a very common way of saying it's been a while. In Yoruba, we say "Eku ojo meta." If you want to translate this literally, it means it's been 3 days. And the common and popular Google Translate will translate this phrase as 3 days old, which is not exactly what we're saying here. Another common one is "Eku igbadun." We use that when we're trying to say to someone, "Oh my God, you're enjoying yourself," or "Please go and enjoy yourself," or "I can see that you're enjoying." That's when we use that phrase. But the literal translation is "happy enjoyment." And our common and popular Google Translate translates this to "dead pleasure," which is totally not what we're talking about here. So there are a couple more phrases like this that we use to communicate in the Yoruba language. And it can be easily lost in translation if you really do not immerse yourself in the culture and you really do not immerse yourself in the language. Another common way in which we communicate in Yoruba is the use of proverbs. I know how to say to someone that what you're about to do is a very bad idea using proverbs. And I don't know if this exists in a couple of other languages out of Africa, but not just in Yoruba as well. I know other languages within Nigeria and within Africa express sentences and feelings using proverbs as well. And these are some examples that you can see on your screen about how you can actually tell someone, you need to keep that as a secret. You need to make the right decision in your life. And then this is what we say to express ourselves when we're trying to have those conversations. Now, let's talk about the cultural impact of multilingualism on communication. Being able to speak an African language fluently is a good step in the right direction. But you see, the language can suffer if its meaning is lost culturally. The reality is there are even African publishers that have failed to translate many of their works to and from indigenous African languages for multiple reasons. From lack of financial interest to the oral sounds which are untranslatable into print. I've spoken about the different nuances that certain ethnicities have. We've also looked at the Yoruba language intricacies. But this is how culture influences language and vice versa. A lot of disparities that arise in between different cultures is due to the imbalance and ignorance of our respective culture. So being multilingual, especially in African languages, should always go hand in hand with studying the respective culture, as it can help increase awareness and oneness with other cultural values and mindsets. We ran a survey across some of our in-house translators, and here's what they had to say about what their language means to them. And one that I found really fascinating was a young man that said, "For me, language is an identity and an identifying tool. It's been one of the few things that bond my family and me together. It helps me know the urgency or importance of issues or matters, because how my people choose their expressions tells what is important at the moment or if the matter is grave, subtle, friendly, or something funny. And this is the reality because this happens to me as well. Coming from a multilingual family, I know when my mom is trying to tell me that what I'm about to say to you is a very serious matter by the language she chooses to speak with. I know when she's trying to tell me we are in danger by the language and the expression of how she chooses to communicate that to me. And I know know when my mom is trying to say, "Oh my God, I love you, son," with the language that she chooses to use. And this is something that happens across several African households. But does the ability to speak multiple languages fluently make you multilingual? Being multilingual is much more than that, as you can see, as I've explained so far. It goes beyond language proficiency into deeper cultural awareness and sensitivities. A word might convey a different meaning depending on the implications that are attached to a term. And sometimes it's necessary to explain these words in a different language, but the literal translation doesn't always convey the original meaning. And this is why I need to say a couple of things to translators and those of us in the localization industry. Many of us here today are a part of the translation industry, and we've all done some amazing jobs with our translations and our content creation and our write-ups and etc. But we honestly have no idea how far our translations reach. I mean, we don't have to be doctors or superheroes before we save lives. But translating words from one language to another is a difficult task, which is why translators should be recognized. And at this point, I really just want to give a round of applause to the translators, the writers, the bloggers, literally everyone that does something to promote languages worldwide. Because by simply translating medical documents, legal documents, and the likes, we have no idea the number of lives that we've saved, and the number of lives that we're saving. And this is why it's very important to celebrate the International Translation Day by paying tribute to our language professionals across the world, around the world. Every day we learn a thing or two, so next time we get a job, I want us to consider the culture of these jobs and these languages that we're working on. Why should multilingualism be embraced? Generally speaking, there are many cognitive benefits of multilingualism, but they don't stop there. We learn to recognize cultural differences and appreciate things that otherwise go unnoticed by speaking other languages. You see, the ability to communicate in other languages allow us to perceive the world through new eyes and through new lenses. It gives us new insights and a better understanding with regard to the culture related to a certain language. Language is also used to establish and define our identities. In this regard, each language has its own linguistic repertoire for expressing culture. Multilingualism also broadens our way of thinking and promotes empathy in social interaction and innovation. And this is what birthed iVoiceAfrica. We also see multilingualism hidden in metaphors and proverbs, and at the end of the day, it facilitates effective interaction among people with different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, both home and abroad. But here are the obstacles that we face in multilingualism. To truly learn a language, one must immerse themselves completely in it. Studies say that it takes between 3 months to 3 years to have a proper grasp of a new language. But with the current fast-paced world that we live in, not many can actually spend that amount of time learning a new language. There has also been loss of many African languages. And the reality is, just as a person can experience language loss, so can society. Multilingualism has been greatly affected by the loss of many African languages. Examples are Mitu and Gule, which are native languages to Sudan. And there are many reasons for its extinction, But one of it is the focus on specific languages and negligence to the rest of it. There is also the limited supply of language instructors who can introduce African languages to alien societies. We need people that have in-depth understanding and are fully immersed into the culture of these African languages before it can be taught. And there is also the conversation, I've already given examples speaking about the Yoruba sentences, but there's a lot of inaccuracies with language AI software when it comes to African language translations. But we cannot deny that AI has been reliable to some extent. And due to this, people are more dependent on them rather than seeking translators from native translators or learning the languages themselves. And we need to do better on that. And here are the possible solutions that we could use to approach these obstacles. While there are challenges, there are also possible solutions. We can encourage formal and traditional teaching of African languages. And honestly, a language will go extinct when people are not educated on the culture that bore the language itself. To avoid this from happening, we need to get rid of gatekeepers that hinder the learning of these languages and also encourage formal and traditional teaching of these languages. At some point, I spoke about African languages being spoken only in informal settings, and that needs to be embraced in formal settings as well. We could also create a community that promotes multilingualism. When you consider the time and effort put into learning a new language, it can get discouraging. But if new language learning models that provide faster means of learning are introduced, then this problem can be solved. Also, communities created solely to promote language learning and multilingualism is another feasible solution. And the third one is we need to provide data to enable accuracy for AI software. And that is one thing that is missing with African languages. Did you know that statistically, Africans are not on the internet for three major reasons, according to the World Economic Forum? When you talk about literacy and you talk about the affordability of internet in Africa, the third thing is there are no content in African languages online. And so Africans are missing out on valuable information that they need. At the same time, big tech companies will let you know that the reason why there is inaccuracies in African languages or there is little or no innovation with African languages is due to the fact that they do not have access to enough data to build and train their engines on these languages. And so that is what we've decided to do as a company in iVoiceAfrica, to be Africa's biggest bank of language data, because we want to offer solutions and we want to create solutions to these problems that Africans are facing, not just in the continent, but in diaspora. So here's how you can reach out to us via email, our website. To partake in this conversation of multilingualism and its cultural impact on communication, we employ the services and train individuals that are professionals of these native African languages. And by doing this, we ensure that every bit of culture is preserved in each of our services, from voiceovers to translations and even content localization. We understand the importance of culture, and this is why we try to imbibe as much as we can in what we do. So please reach out to us. Please send us an email. Please send us a message, and we can keep talking about this narrative and promote African languages together. A big thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for listening to me, and a big shout out to pros.com for having us on this conversation. I will be happy and glad to take your questions, your comments, and your suggestions in the chat box. Thank you, and see you next time.